Welcome. We are here for this seminar regarding the role of diet in rheumatic disease. And so you see the title of this presentation, that's Don't Neglect a Correct Nutrition in Rheumatic Diseases. Diet is fundamental, and today we have also scientific basis to try to explain the effect of the diet and different nutrients. So today we consider that the immune system, and we will see how the immune system interacts with the contents of the nutritionals. It's a bridge, of course, for the majority of autoimmune rheumatic diseases. Two major pillars today we look at with intention to explain the role of nutritional and in immunity, and the role of microbiota and the role of epigenetic. And both are extremely important, and the majority of the study are now focused on interaction between nutritional, microbiota, and epigenetics. Of course, at the end of this story, the disease, the autoimmune disease. Look at the microbiota. We know that the microbiota includes all microorganisms contained in the body, and gut is the major container. We know that there is a lot of variation in the contents of bacteria there are in the microbiota, and 80% of variation are observed. And the microbiota is so important that it is expressed 10 times more than the microbes in the whole human cells. Which is the role of microbiota? We know, for example, that what we consider dysbiosis, so the alteration in the ratio between the good bacteria and the wrong bacteria, it's maybe induced by different foods. We know there are bacteria like segmented filamentous bacteria, they are prophlogogenous, so induce inflammation in the gut. But on the other side, there are other bacteria like Bacteroides fragilis that exert an anti-inflammatory action. Or even bacteria like Bifidobacterium infantis that in some way protect the epithelium from the easy inflammation. Which is the role of nutrients. Look at the meat, the red meat. The content in the meat of carnitine, and so 3-methylamine oxide is one of the foods, bad foods, to increase the concentration of segmented filamentous bacteria. On the other side, fibers, vegetables and fruits, they are the major producers, contain short-chain fatty acid, and Bacteroides fragilis is easier to grow. On the other side, also as a protective, is the content of tryptophans that we have in the nuts, and here is important for the ligand and acetylcholine. So the foods change the composition of the microbiota. It is important because 70% of the immune cells and even 80% of autoantibody we produce are produced in the gut. This is a very, very important aspect. So this dysbiosis is observing chronic inflammatory rheumatic diseases. And so when the inflammation starts in the gut, a lot of products, a lot of mediators are released like prostaglandins and also, of course, cytokines. They move in circulation and they induce systemic inflammation. So it's not strange that in case of inflammatory bowel disease, you can get spondyloarthritis, for example, or other forms of arthritis related to the bad microbiota and their products and local inflammation. So rheumatic disease have microbiota as an important background, and diet may influence. Looking at epigenetic are heritable change in DNA expression, but they cannot be explained by variation in DNA. Epigenetics is the ensemble, we can say, of proteins around DNA, and are a bridge between the environmental factors, and diet is one of these, and the genes. And through different mechanisms like methylation or the presence of different microRNA, determine the switch off of genes involved in the disease and may protect it or not. And here again, foods that interfere with methylation, demethylation, are important regarding several genes involved in inflammatory reaction. So the chromatin package and the alteration of the chromatin packaging are really important, and foods may interfere. Look here, for example, how diet could influence the immune system and may, from the metabolic status, induce and change protein, mRNA, and enzymatic substrate enzymes. And so this is related to the changes as mentioned in protein that are part of the histone, modified enzymes, and the structure itself of the epigenetic, can I say, code around the genes. And so at the end, there is the activation, repression gene, the transcription, and the genes are activated or suppressed. How the diet may change through the epigenetic, the activity of genes involved in inflammatory reaction. In animal models, for example, diet clearly modified the DNA methylation that we discussed as an important step in epigenetic action. And the same happens in humans. A diet low in methionine, for example, methionine is contained in stockfish, walnuts, grana, chicken, tuna, turkey, or folate in green vegetable, or choline in eggs and chicken, induce steatosis in mice and decrease the DNA methylation. And this is important because we know that methylation normally represses the gene transcriptions. And so if you are in a well condition, the demethylation induced by diet, incorrect diet, may activate the inflammatory process. The Mediterranean, it's important. We know, for example, that in the area of Mediterranean, all the countries are around the Mediterranean Sea have a lower incidence and severity and even mortality related to rheumatoid arthritis, compared, you can see, to the north and other areas. What means that apart the climate, the foods that are available in the area of Mediterranean, in other countries, you can see from the east to the west to the north to the south of Mediterranean, have a common action. And this common action is related to the biochemistry of the foods are available in this area. This is an important point because the healthy diet and the Mediterranean diet means the same. Why? We know there is this pyramid, different components play a different role, and you see the last step and the last meat that should be used is the meat and the sweet drinks. We will analyze very fast the different contents in the different foods and the different biochemistry and how all these products may influence the health. The fish, of course, is the most important component of the diet in the Mediterranean diet. And there are several studies that are showing that the use of fish and the contents, polyunsaturated fatty acid, reduce the risk of rheumatoid arthritis. But let me go 2,000 years ago, when the Roman soldier going around, strong gladiators, strong army members, used to resist very well to the different conditions. It was used by the army, the so-called garum. What is garum? Garum is a fermented fish sauce, used as a condiment in cuisine of Asians, even in Greece. But this is very important because it's extracted from the fish. A fish means also a donor of PUFA, 3-PUFA, and we'll see another important hormone, and I will tell you shortly. So-called liver oil used by Roman soldier was a secret, one of the secrets. And you can see here shops, ancient factory where was produced the garum, Roman factory in Portugal, or a container from Pompeii, the old city. So the fish is important. But moving to much more recent study, a Swedish study, and the Swedish study looking at long-term intake of dietary long-chain PUFA and risk of rheumatoid arthritis. This is a prospective cohort study in women. The large number of 32,000 women born between 14 and 48. 200 cases of rheumatoid arthritis were identified and was considered the intake of dietary, the PUFA with 3-omega. And you see that this continuous long-term use of this kind of fish and content and biochemistry associated with 35% decrease in the risk of rheumatoid arthritis. and the longer and consistent consumption of fish, serving 1 week while we prefer 3 to 4 a week, is associated in any case of 30% of risk in rheumatoid arthritis. This is just one of the studies, because there are a lot of studies, and all showing there is a dose-response relative risk with 90% coefficients that, adjusted for any other confusing factor, tell us that there is a direct correlation between the use of PUFA and the risk of rheumatoid arthritis. Very important point. But what about the synovial fluid at the joint and the plasma levels of PUFAs in patients with inflammatory arthritis? If we eat fish, we have a concentration sufficient in the synovial fluid to explain the anti-arthritic action, anti-inflammatory action? Yes. This study showed a positive correlation between the intake of foods and fish rich in PUFA and the concentration, both in plasma and synovial fluid, a significant concentration. So it's really interesting, because now we know that fish very well act as a biochemical positive modulator of the inflammatory reaction. But there is another important component that is in the fish, in the fat fish rich, the D hormone. You know very well that vitamin D, so-called, it's practically an hormone. And even its major source of vitamin D is the sunlight, 80%, transformation, the hydrocholesterol in the precursor of vitamin D, still 20% comes from the foods, and especially from the fish. And so a common basis for cortisol, sex hormones, and mineral corticoids is the cholesterol. And you can see here is the basis for D hormone. It's again the cholesterol. So it's not unexpected that steroid hormone and vitamin D play immune modulatory activities. And this is important, and the paradox, because in countries like Norway, at the latitude of 70 degrees, the content of vitamin D is much higher than, for example, in the South Europe latitudes. And this is due simply to the high consumption of cold liver and cold liver oil that is common in this area. So you see at the top of this graphic, Norway and Sweden have a higher concentration of 25 vitamin D compared to Italy, Spain, that are classical Mediterranean countries. This is not a paradox. It's due to the low solar light and UV in this area, and is, of course, replaced by the use of oil. So at the end of the story, the effect of fish consumption, together with the integration with the oil fish, increase significantly the concentration. And sometimes if you take 1 or 3 times or more than 4 times a fish a week, 4 days a week, for example, you obtain the maximum concentration of vitamin D that you can really have a physiological action. So fish, it's important. And if we look at another form of arthritis, osteoarthritis, for example, epidemiology related to the latitude, and so the sun and the role of sun on vitamin D, and so the deficiency in the higher latitudes, you see here, that in north of the globe, the epidemiology of knee osteoarthritis is much higher than at the level of equator, or the lower latitudes where the sun is the king. What about fruits and vegetables? Here is one of the most important aspects, because fruits and vegetables, fresh fruit and vegetable, with their color, their fibers, are fundamental. And the intake of fruit or vegetables is well known in different studies, an important source, especially local and fresh fruits and vegetables of vitamin D. And vitamin D is so important for the health of the connective tissue. So you see here the association between the dietary use of vitamin C and the lowest risk of arthritis. This is important even if you use cooked vegetables, but it's important even more. This is a case control study done in Greece, that if you add to the cooked vegetables and open the cells, make available the content of the cells, the antioxidative component, plus olive oil with all the activity of olive oil, and you get even much more natural antioxidant activity related to the content, for example, tocopherol that is inside the fruits and vegetable. So the best way to act in anti-inflammatory antioxidant activity is the association of green vegetables plus olive oil. This is one of the most important secret in the pillars of the Mediterranean diet. Fresh vegetable, fresh fruits and vegetable cooked with olive oil. Because an anti-inflammatory action. How many fruit a day? Better is 5 a day with a variety of colors. The most colored are the most high content of flavonoids and other antioxidants, and better is as well. Fresh, local, and cooked or raw is not important. As important is, especially in cooked, the combined olives or olive oil. And moving now to meat, you know that recently meat is considered a poison. And even if it's one of the most important source of proteins, it's not so severe, the final sentence about meat. Here you have a study that considered a large number of patients, and the meat consumption and risk of inflammatory polyarthritis was studied, studying 7-day food diaries, assessed using a 7-day food diaries. And you see here, for example, how the daily intake of red meat and the risk of arthritis and the intensity of inflammatory polyarthritis risk, it's significantly correlated. And higher is the content, higher is the risk and the significance. So looking at this study seems that really there is an action. But then in another study, considered 82,000 women, this association between meat consumption as well as the risk of rheumatoid arthritis, taking consideration also the protein and iron that meat, red meat may offer. Here again, there is another, a different, less significant, no significant association. So that means that several factors may condition the results. Like, for example, different methods of data collection, different population, different criteria of the diagnosis, but even different combination of other bias, like maybe the gut microbiota condition, the lower intake of protected foods like fish, or the fat or nitritis for the storing of the foods. In few words, you can see here in any case the population of Finland, New Zealand, UK, US, Denmark, with higher consumption of meat, red meat, have higher prevalence of rheumatoid arthritis. So, how to do? Recommendation for meat and fish is to limit the consumption of red meat once a week, due to the action of carnitine we already discussed at the beginning and the influence of microbiota. And prefer legumes, possibly cooked with olive oil, and chicken, removing the skin that is very fast, and of course fish. So consume fatty fish, sardine, salmon, soybean, because they have a high concentration of cholesterol, but also high concentration of the vitamin D. And serve, as mentioned, with pasta is perfect. Spaghetti with oil and fish, and with cooked vegetables. And now we move fastly to 3 important white power: the sugar, the sodium, and waste. The salt, sodium chloride, sodium and salt, how much is risky for inflammation? Don't consider about hypertension, we know, but what about inflammation? Sodium chloride now is clear that it is negative nutritional for rheumatoid arthritis because activate inflammatory M1 macrophages and even the subpopulation Th17. There are several studies showing the importance of this content. So sodium chloride must be considered with care. And this is some cohort, a large cohort. You see in the first series of black bar, we can say the patient with rheumatoid arthritis using progressively high content of sodium talc have an increased risk and diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. But there are some biases that may change this. For example, the smoke. Smokers have a per se an increased risk of rheumatoid arthritis, and the salt, you can see, is less important. You add another risk with sodium chloride, but the smoke is really one of the worst component of the daily activity, the daily intake is smoke, but smoke is rich of very deleterious contents, including also CO2 at the dried carbonate. So salt must be used carefully, and it's suggested to limit the cooking. And if you like the food tasty, you can use herbs or spices, but don't use salt, as less as possible. And now the last important aspect is related to the beverages. When we eat, we drink. What we should drink, it's better to drink. There are several options, of course. Let me start with coffee and tea. The coffee and tea consumption has been studied as a possible risk of rheumatoid arthritis. And here you have the result of a large meta-analysis, 3 cohort study, 2 case control study, altogether 1,280 cases of rheumatoid arthritis versus 134,000 known cases. As you can see, the use of coffee lower than 4 cups a day do not increase, but over 4 cups a day increase the risk, at least of seropositive rheumatoid arthritis. So, in any case, the association is mediated to the enhanced activity of the B cells or other mechanisms that may induce the production of autoantibodies, not yet clear. For the tea, no problem. The role of tea is not positive, not negative, it's neutral, but it's a good way to intake fluids that we need. We need fluids a day. But the very real danger is the sugar-sweetened soda consumption. So the beverage we use, especially young people, and here the study in women considering 200,000 women aged of 25-55 shows clearly that the use of sweetened sugar-added soda beverage is dangerous for the risk of rheumatoid arthritis, and especially between the age of 20-30 years old. The consumption of such kind of beverage with excess of fruit fructose, this is the real the killer. It's the fructose, because alter the ratio of fructose to the glucose, and here you can see that the risk of rheumatoid arthritis increase in a very significant manner when the use of the sugar added synthetic beverage, we can say, is done. So must be absolutely limited. And finally, what about alcohol and milk? To the devil and the angel. The alcohol is the devil, but not so much in rheumatoid arthritis. Now there is a clear agreement that the moderate consumption is not dangerous, even may decrease the risk of developing rheumatoid arthritis. So it's a sort of therapy, but don't exaggerate. Especially red wine, and here some suggestion regarding the use of alcohol, and the use of alcohol is this one. It's at least keep on, this is a study in 4 million of person for years, and 3-4 standard drinks a week is associated with a reduced risk. So if you have 1 or 2 glasses a day, you don't have an increased risk, at least no risk, but if less, even decreased risk. But the general recommendation, I'm sorry for the ladies, is that the ratio for women is 1 glass of red wine, and for the men 2 red wine. Don't tell me why, because this is what is suggested, not one study, several studies. So still this difference that may be disturbed. But wine, red wine, is health. And milk, this is the last suggestion for the diet, the last beverage. The last, at least, milk is that you have to go at a diet free of milk when diagnosed rheumatoid arthritis. And this is due to the intolerance to lactose, due to the content of casein that may be important allergenic products, and so may increase the immune system reactivity. So if drinking milk is all right for gout, because decrease the progression of gout, maybe decrease the progression of osteoporosis, not clear in osteoarthritis, because the studies show that the people with knee osteoarthritis that need surgical replacement are much more when they use milk. So avoid to use, in any case, milk with fat content. Use free or low-fat milk containing to avoid extra calories. The last suggestion is related to the cheese, and the cheese is important, and especially the cheese is related to the another important content, that is yogurt, because yogurt contains probiotics, and probiotics are bacteria, and may associated with, as I mentioned to you, that foods may decrease the inflammatory reaction. And we know yogurts decrease the insulin resistance and may prevent diabetes type 2. So in conclusion, we can say that that it's really important, the role of diet, because the diet is a sort of complementary way to predict, to anticipate some clear risk of activation of immune response. During the disease may increase the severity of the disease, autoimmune-related disease, and even in therapy, adding for 365 days a year, so every day, the correct foods, you can also decrease the inflammatory reaction. And Hippocrates used to say 400 years before Christus, let Thai foods by the medicine and Thai medicine by the food. Thank you very much. Enjoy your foods.